For nearly 6 decades, the blocks of Farish Street sat mostly quiet, a ghost of what had once been an economy so powerful it nearly rivaled Harlem. Hey, it's Paul Wolf with the front row seat to conversations on culture from Jackson, Mississippi. We call our podcast Soul Sessions. It's the people, places, and events that make the city with soul shine. On today's show, my colleague Yolanda Clay Moore sits down with Dr. Robby Luckett, historian at Jackson State University and president of the newly formed Farish Street Historic District Main Street Association Board of Directors, to talk about what a new Main Street designation means for one of the South's most significant black business districts, and why, this time, the momentum might actually stick.
Dr. Luckett, it's such a pleasure for you to speak with us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
I want you to just kind of share what the Farish Street Main Street designation, just get a little background information for those who are not familiar with this organization.
Yeah, sure. So the Main Street Association is a national organization that's been around for a long time. I'm not exactly sure when it was originally founded, but it does work across the country in communities, working with them to maintain, improve, revitalize the parts of their communities that are really essential to business, but also to visitors, to anyone who is committed and engaged with the well-being of the community. And you see it often in downtown areas, especially in smaller cities and towns, but a commitment to the revitalization and the maintenance of communities through work around certainly preserving buildings and physical structures, but also really engaging community in programming, in art, in community building kind of writ large. And so it's an exciting thing for the Farish Street part of the work in Jackson to now be officially a part of the Mississippi Main Street Association and that national Main Street organization. It means all kinds of supports to help us do the work that we hope to do, and also just a real stability in kind of the future of Farish Street in Jackson.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that. Now, let's dive a little bit deeper. For those listeners who may not be familiar with the jewel in our city, Farish Street Historic District, just talk about the historical significance it has to our city.
Sure. So, of course, we are a southern city. And if you think about the era of what we call Jim Crow and Jim Crow segregation, one of the things that we don't think about often in the context of Jim Crow, which is, of course, it was a terrible white supremacist regime. There was terror tied to the regime of Jim Crow. There was black disfranchisement. There were all of these challenges that over from the late 19th century, really in through the first 2/3 of the 20th century or so, that white supremacists used to control the power structures. And when we talk about power structure, I think we're talking about political power, social power, and economic power. But the flip side of that, too, was in an ultra-segregated world based on race, Black communities were able to build vibrant institutions, schools, churches, businesses, and Farish Street was that community in Jackson. It was the most important Black business and residential district in a state that was majority Black. I mean, Mississippi will be majority Black from the end of the Civil War all the way up through World War II. And during World War II, the Great Migration, roughly 4 million African Americans will leave the South for other opportunities. But even after World War II, Mississippi is nearly half Black, and the city of Jackson is increasingly Black as a capital city. And so those African Americans concentrated in Mississippi had a real power, especially economically. And what you saw in Farish Street was an economy that develops there, and this street that runs through the middle of downtown Jackson, where our old state capitol is and where the governor's mansion is, but it bisects Capitol Street downtown. But Farish Street was the major Black business district that at one point by World War II is going to have an economic output that almost rivals Harlem. That's how much power was concentrated. And so you think about Jim Crow segregation and you think about businesses like, say, a theater, where kind of traditionally and stereotypically, if African Americans were to use theaters during segregation, we think, oh, they must have had to use the balcony or sit in the back. Or if they went to a department store, that they weren't allowed to try on hats or shoes or jackets, that they just had to buy things straight off the rack. Well, in Fair Street, these were Black-owned businesses, right? You could try on a jacket. You could try on a pair of shoes. You could go to a Black-owned butcher, a Black-owned pharmacy, a Black-owned restaurant, grocery stores. And so this economy was incredibly vibrant, and that community was just remarkable. And if you look at some of the images from that time, it's really striking, because we think of Jim Crow as this overwhelmingly oppressive regime, which it could be. But at the same time, there's incredible resilience in the Black community, and Fair Street is a representation of that incredible resilience.
Yeah, I think that's called an oxymoron, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We want to think of a place like Mississippi at the height of Jim Crow as being almost a totalitarian regime. That's how we act. But the reality is, for the Black people who lived here, they created lives of incredible dignity and beauty and achievement. And, through education, through schools like Jackson State, of course, where I'm on the faculty, a co-educational school for Black teachers and preachers, that its permanent location in Jackson will be settled in 1904. And when you think about 1904 in Black Mississippi, most folks would think there's no chance anything like that could ever succeed. But it did, right? And now Jackson State's one of the largest historically Black colleges in the nation. And so there always, when I talk about this history, I think there's two sides of it, because we have to be honest about the very real oppression of Jim Crow, but also the resistance to that oppression and the determination of Black Mississippians to lead these incredible lives. And Fair Street was an incredible reflection of that at its height.
We talk about the resilience, the success of this community, which was known only to be second to Harlem in its economic prowess. So, and we know that there have been many attempts to revitalize this neighborhood after the Great Migration happened, and we took all this talent and success up north. So, what does this Main Street designation, how pivotal can it be for the revitalization of this neighborhood? And what do you see the future looking like?
Well, first, let me just take one step back and be clear. What would ultimately be the economic downfall of Fair Street was not really the Great Migration, but it was desegregation. Because what happened is, after 1964 and the Civil Rights Act and public desegregation of accommodations, Black dollars that were focused and concentrated in these Black-owned businesses and districts like Fair Street, those Black dollars start getting dispersed, right? And you can now eat at the white-owned cafeteria or, shop on Capitol Street finally, right? And as those dollars disperse, those Black businesses suffer. And the story of Fair Street is not unique to Jackson. That story repeats itself in every Southern city. Every Southern city sees these Black economies decline after desegregation. So that's really what we were facing with Fair Street. It takes time. As someone who grew up in Jackson, or in this area, the thing is, it's the 80s and the 90s before you really see Fair Street kind of collapse in a shell of itself. It takes a good 20 years for that process to complete. So what does the Main Street designation do for us? Well, there's a few things. First and foremost, the commitment of the Jackson Redevelopment Authority to the project means that there are people whose professional careers are committed to seeing this revitalization happen. And as you mentioned, there have been very serious attempts to bring Fair Street back that have ultimately not been successful, including previous attempts to be part of the Main Street Association that early in my career I was a part of on Fair Street. But the fact that we have the buy-in from the Jackson Redevelopment Authority, we have the support of this new administration and Mayor John Horn and his office, and now this launching and the official creation of the Farish Street Main Street Association, the Farish Street Historic District Main Street Association, with a 501c3 means that you have not just like interest and not just momentum, but you have institutions and you have people with institutionalized support structures and power to see this happen. And hopefully it will be a process that begins with the first couple of blocks of Farish Street, with already plans to bringing vendors along Farish Street and other projects that are happening there in the first couple of blocks. But because you have this institutional buy-in and the support of an organization like Main Street, and now the Farish Street Historic District Main Street Association has its official 501c3 status as a nonprofit, you've got the institutional supports within the city and a wide buy-in from a diverse group of shareholders. There's real momentum to make this all happen and to actually see success finally on Farish Street after all these years.
I just hope that I can tell my children about this process one day. When you think about all the things that are being done that we're trying to reimagine, if the walls of Farish Street could speak, what do you think they would want this generation to remember, and what would they ask us to rebuild?
Well, ultimately, I think of Farish Street as a place of hope. And hope in terms of joy and celebration, but also, like hope in terms of communal power, right, for the people who lived there. I mean, Farish Street also had, the incredible churches, the historic churches that are in the district. I think about Collins Funeral Home. I think about the bookstore, Marshall's bookstore that's still there. And,
I used to actually go get sheet music from that bookstore.
Yeah. The Big Apple Inn, the Smith Robertson Museum. I think about all of these institutions that have survived and have been there on Farish Street. And what Farish Street, like if the walls could talk, and if the historical actors that made up Farish Street in its heyday could come back, I think they would say, hey, remember us. Remember the joy that was here. Remember the power and the strength of this community to support itself at a time when most people didn't think anything like that was possible for Black Mississippians. And we're in an era right now in this moment where there's a lot of tension. There's seemingly a ton of conflict, and sometimes that feels like intractable, that we just have gone somehow backwards. But the reality is we have a roadmap. We have examples of people who experienced a much more difficult time, a much more problematic and troubling era in Mississippi history. And they've shown us what can happen if a community supports itself and if a community has the institutional power to support itself. And hopefully we can remember that as Farish Street now finally comes back and starts to revitalize itself.
This is such an exciting time for us. I can't help but think with the tourism hat, how this can be a part of a heritage tourism.
100%. The thing that I said to Yolanda Owens, who is our, she's the executive director on the JRA staff, the Jackson Redevelopment Authority for the Farish Street Main Street Association. The thing I said to Yolanda, I was like, look, all the visitors who are coming to Jackson for the two Mississippi museums, who are coming to Jackson to see Medgar Evers' home, who are coming to Jackson to visit the COFO Center, which I run at JSU, which is the headquarters for Freedom Summer. We just had a group of bus from California just pull in today. All of those people are coming to Jackson because they want the experience of being in Jackson. They want the cultural experience of being here, of seeing and doing these things. And Farish Street fits perfectly within that puzzle, because you spend 2 hours at the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum and you want to get lunch. Great. Stay there if you want to and eat lunch in the amazing Nissan Cafe, or pop out head 2 blocks down the road and you're on Farish Street and you're having a real experience in one of these original places on Farish Street. And so I think it fits perfectly within the very real cultural heritage tourism we have now coming into our city. And it only will benefit all of us who are doing this work across the city and benefit the entire city and benefit downtown Jackson. Because again, when we talk about Farish Street is a part of downtown Jackson. It bisects Capitol Street, the main thoroughfare through downtown Jackson. And so what happens for Farish Street is good for the entire city. And it's good for our entire state as the capital city, especially.
Yeah, I have to go back to that phrase, a rising tide lifts all boats. And we believe that Farish Street is definitely a rising tide. And we can't wait to see what other boats it lifts.
Absolutely, 100%. In this moment, we have this momentum and we've got these institutional supports in place to try and make it happen this time. And I'm committed to it. And I know everyone who's involved in this project on the Main Street Association side is absolutely committed to it as well.
Well, Dr. Luckett, we certainly appreciate your contribution to this effort, and we're excited to see the results that we know are coming forth. And we look forward to just diving into all that Main Street has to offer Farish Street.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it too. And keep your ears peeled because there's going to be some really exciting news and developments coming pretty quickly. I think we're going to be amazed to see this transformation that's coming.
That is the formidable Dr. Robby Luckett in conversation with my colleague Yolanda Claymore. You know, this story is about what happens when historical knowledge becomes actionable, when knowing exactly why a community collapsed becomes the blueprint for rebuilding it. Robby was clear-eyed about something that often gets glossed over. It wasn't the Great Migration that hollowed out Farish Street, it was desegregation. And understanding that distinction changes how you approach revitalization. The Farish Street Historic District Main Street Association now has a 501c3, the support of the Jackson Redevelopment Authority, and the backing of Mayor John Horn's office. If you want to donate or learn more about the programs and projects they have going on, we'll have links in our show notes to the Farish Street Historic District Main Street Association at visitjackson.com/soul sessions. This podcast is produced by Visit Jackson, the destination organization for Mississippi's capital city. Our executive producers are Jonathan Pettis and Dr. Ricky Thigpen, and I'm our managing editor. There's always something great going on in Jackson, and we keep up with it at visitjackson.com. I'm Paul Wolf, and you've been listening to Soul Sessions.